The debate ended, not with a press conference, not with a paper published in a physics journal. It ended in the silence between two realizations that had no business meeting, one made in a laboratory in the 20th century, the other carved into stone 5,000 years before the laboratory existed. A physicist measures a particle and discovers that the act of measurement determines what the particle becomes. An ancient seer sits in a temple and concludes that consciousness is the substance from which reality is projected. Two people separated by 5 millennia, operating in completely different systems, using completely different methods, arriving at a conclusion so identical it should be impossible. And yet it happened, not once, at least 5 times independently, across 5 traditions that never exchanged a single word. You have been watching the simulation debate unfold for years now, the physicists making headlines, the philosophers arguing definitions, the tech billionaires who discuss it on podcasts as though it were an intellectual exercise instead of a lived reality pressing against the edges of daily experience. Something in you has suspected, for longer than you can trace, that the answer was not going to arrive from any of them, that the resolution would come from a direction nobody in the mainstream conversation was looking. Tonight, that suspicion gets confirmed, not by opinion, not by speculation, but by the accumulated evidence of 5,000 years of independent investigation conducted on 5 separate continents. And the conclusion is not what any of those commentators expected. Before we go deeper into this, if this kind of knowledge speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. This is where we keep building on this work together. The way the simulation question gets framed in popular culture is already a trap. Are we living in a simulation, yes or no? That framing assumes there exists a real reality somewhere outside the simulation, a base layer made of actual, solid, independent substance. And every single source we are about to examine tonight, quantum physics, Vedic philosophy, Egyptian theology, Pythagorean mathematics, Hermetic teaching, Buddhist emptiness, says the same thing about that assumption. It does not survive examination. The ancient texts, the mystery schools, and the most advanced physics of the modern era do not answer the simulation question. They dissolve it. They reveal that the question itself is built on a foundation that collapses the moment you look closely enough. What if the oldest spiritual traditions on Earth and the most advanced physics laboratory in the world arrived at the same conclusion? Independently, separated by thousands of years and entirely different methods of inquiry. Not a similar conclusion, not a parallel that requires squinting to see. The same conclusion, stated in different vocabularies, but describing an identical structure of reality. What would that mean about the universe you inhabit? What would it mean about the nature of what you call solid and real? And what would it mean about you, standing here tonight at the precise point where these two streams of knowledge converge for the first time in a single conversation, if both of them are pointing at the same thing? A physicist stands at a podium in 1931. His name is Max Planck. He is not a mystic. He is the man whose work literally founded quantum mechanics, the branch of physics that describes how reality operates at its most fundamental level. And he says this: I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Meanwhile, the Upanishads, composed before Planck's civilization had a written language, state the identical thing using different words. The physical world is Maya, a projection of consciousness that appears independently real while being entirely dependent on the awareness observing it. Two sources, same conclusion, separated by roughly 3,000 years, no shared texts, no shared context. No communication between them. Before the texts came the experience. The mystery schools of ancient Egypt did not begin with books. They began with initiation, a ritualistic death. At Memphis and Luxor, the priests would lead candidates through questioning about their origins, their sincerity, their readiness. Those deemed worthy were led past a statue of Isis into underground crypts, where what awaited them was designed to break the initiate's relationship with perceived reality before teaching them what reality actually was. The initiation did not start with information, it started with the demolition of certainty, because the first thing every mystery school understood was that you cannot teach someone the nature of the construct while they are still convinced the construct is solid. The Egyptian mystery school at Memphis, centered around the god Ptah, preserved what may be the earliest recorded description of a constructed reality. The Memphite theology, inscribed on the Shabaka stone and formalized around 2000 BCE, though based on even older traditions, states that Ptah created the entire world through two instruments, heart and tongue. In Egyptian understanding, the heart was where thought occurred. The tongue was the instrument of speech, of information made audible. Ptah thought the world into existence and spoke it into form, not through physical labor, through consciousness becoming information, becoming physical reality. A civilization 4,000 years ago described creation as an information process, and that sequence is the exact sequence that quantum information theory would formalize millennia later. Write in the comments today's date and complete the sentence. I see through the construct, not as a wish, as a recognition of something you have always sensed. 2,000 miles east and roughly 1,000 years before the Shabaka stone was carved, the Rig Veda, among the oldest surviving texts in human history, dated approximately 1500 to 1200 BCE, introduced a concept that would reshape philosophy for the next 3 millennia. Maya. In its earliest Vedic form, Maya did not mean illusion the way modern spiritual culture uses the word. It meant extraordinary power, the capacity of consciousness to project a world so convincing that those inside it forget it is being projected. Not a world that is fake, a world that is real, but real the way a dream is real to the dreamer while the dream is occurring. Why did the concept deepen? Because the Upanishads, the philosophical texts that emerged from the Vedic tradition over the following centuries, took Maya from a description of divine power to a diagnosis of the human condition. The physical world, they taught, distracts individuals from realizing their true nature, not because the world is evil or broken, because it is convincing. It is so thoroughly constructed, so internally consistent, so responsive, so textured, that those experiencing it from inside lose track of the fact that it is being generated. The construct works precisely because it does not announce itself as a construct. Sound familiar? The Buddhist tradition arrived at the same conclusion through an entirely different door. While Hindu philosophy described Maya as a projection of divine consciousness, the Buddha, around 500 BCE, described sunyata, emptiness, not nothingness, something more precise and more disturbing. Sunyata is the absence of inherent, independent existence in every object, every person, every phenomenon. Nothing carries its own substance. Everything exists through what the Buddhist tradition calls dependent origination, through its relationships with other things. Remove the relationships, remove the conditions, and nothing remains. No core, no essence, no independent reality hiding behind the appearances. The appearances are all there is, and the appearances are empty. No substance, no independent core, no solidity that survives examination. The surface you are resting your hand on right now. The screen generating these words. The body processing the sound of this voice. All of it, according to a teaching preserved by an unbroken lineage for 2,500 years, is empty of inherent existence. Existing only because of the web of conditions producing it. Shift the conditions and the configuration changes. Remove the conditions entirely and nothing remains to fall back on. The Buddhist tradition did not arrive at this through speculation. It arrived at it through the most rigorous form of direct observation available to the human mind, sustained, disciplined attention to the nature of experience itself. If this is resonating with you, let me know by liking this video. It helps more people find this content at the right moment. Pythagoras did not teach mathematics the way modern schools teach it. For his school, founded around 550 BCE on the island of Samos and later in Croton, mathematics was not a tool for solving practical problems. It was a revelation about the nature of reality itself. All is number was not a statement about arithmetic. It was a cosmological claim. The universe, at its deepest level, is not made of substance. It is made of proportion, ratio, harmony, the same things that define a mathematical structure, the same things that define code. Pythagoras looked at reality and saw not matter, but mathematics, and he concluded that the mathematics was not a description of reality. It was reality. Picture the inner circle of the Pythagorean school. Students admitted in tears, years of silent preparation required before the deeper teachings were shared. When initiates finally reached the inner level, what did they encounter? That the sound of a plucked string follows precise mathematical ratios. That the distances between planets follow the same ratios. That the harmony of music and the structure of the cosmos share a language. And that language is pure mathematics. Not a metaphor for mathematics, mathematics itself. The Pythagoreans concluded that a single code runs everything, from the vibrating string to the orbiting planet to the structure of the human soul. And they guarded this knowledge with the same intensity that the Egyptian schools guarded theirs. Something in you just registered that, not as new information, but as confirmation of something you already carry, the sense that reality has a code, that behind the surface of what your eyes report, something deeper is running, something is computing, something is generating the output you experience as the world. That instinct did not arrive from a science fiction film. It did not come from a podcast about simulation theory or a conversation at a dinner table. It has been present in human awareness for at least 5,000 years, surfacing in every civilization that turned its attention inward with sufficient seriousness. Every tradition that investigated the nature of reality arrived at this same recognition. They named it differently. The structure they described is identical. The Hermetic tradition, rooted in teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and documented in the Corpus Hermeticum of the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, placed one principle above all others as its foundation. The universe is mental, not partially mental, not metaphorically mental, entirely. Physical reality, in Hermetic teaching, exists within a universal consciousness, the way a dream exists within the mind of the dreamer. The Kybalion, published in 1908 by anonymous authors calling themselves the Three Initiates, formalized this as the first of 7 principles. The all is mind. The universe is mental. Remove the dreamer, and the dream does not become a different dream. It ceases to exist. The physical world in this framework is not made of substance. It is made of mind. How did traditions separated by continents, by centuries, by completely different languages and cultural contexts arrive at the same foundational claim? Egypt said Ptah thought the world into being. India said consciousness projects the Maya. Greece said reality is mathematical code. The Hermetic lineage said the universe is mental. Buddhism said everything is empty of inherent substance, existing only as patterns of conditions, no shared texts between them, no academic conferences, no communication of any kind, 5 independent witnesses, 1 testimony, and the testimony is this: what you call the physical world is not what it appears to be, something else. Consciousness, information, mathematics, mind is generating it. If you can feel the gap between sensing this truth and being able to apply it, like the understanding is arriving but the operating system hasn't updated yet, I left something for you in the first pinned comment. It is for those who are ready to cross from recognition to operation. The standard dismissal is that this is pattern matching, that humans see connections where none exist, that ancient texts are metaphorical while modern physics is literal, and comparing them is intellectually dishonest. That dismissal does not survive contact with the specifics. When the Upanishads describe a world that appears substantial but dissolves under examination into relationships and conditions, they are describing, in philosophical vocabulary, what quantum mechanics confirmed with experimental equipment thousands of years later. When the Pythagoreans claim reality is fundamentally mathematical, they are stating what every physics equation silently assumes. The precision of the convergence is the evidence. Metaphor does not produce that level of precision. Independent confirmation does. 5 traditions, 5 continents, thousands of years apart. Same conclusion, not similar. Identical in structure. Reality is not what it appears. Solidity is not solid. Independence is not independent. Substance is not substantial. And the observer, the one who looks, who measures, who is aware, is not standing outside the system watching it passively. The observer is inside the mechanism, participating in the generation of what appears on the surface of experience. The Hindu tradition says this. The Buddhist tradition confirms it. The Egyptian initiates built temples around it. The Pythagorean school encoded it in mathematics. The Hermetic lineage placed it as the first of all principles. Every tradition that seriously investigated reality says this. Every one. The simulation debate did not begin with Nick Bostrom publishing his paper in 2003. It began the moment Thomas Young fired photons through 2 slits in 1801 and watched them produce results that no model of solid independent reality could explain. The double-slit experiment, replicated thousands of times, confirmed in every physics laboratory that has attempted it, demonstrated something that should have ended the debate about the nature of reality 2 centuries ago. Particles do not behave like particles until they are measured. Unobserved, they pass through both slits simultaneously as waves, producing interference patterns. The moment a detector records which slit the particle uses, the wave behavior collapses. The particle chooses, and the only variable that changed was whether information about the particle's path was being extracted. A photon leaves the source. It encounters 2 slits in a barrier. When no detector is present, the photon does not go through one slit or the other. It goes through both, simultaneously, as a wave function spread across space. The interference pattern it creates on the back wall proves this. The moment you place a detector at one slit to record which path the photon takes, the interference vanishes. The wave function collapses. The photon behaves as a single particle passing through a single slit. Nothing about the photon changed. Nothing about the barrier changed. The only variable was observation, whether the information about the state was being recorded. The system behaves differently depending on whether it is being watched. That is not a fringe interpretation. That is the standard result. Read that sentence again. The system behaves differently depending on whether it is being watched. In every other domain of experience, the thing you observe exists independently of the observation. A rock is a rock, whether you look at it or not. But at the quantum level, the level where reality is actually generated, observation is not passive. It is participatory. The act of extracting information from the system changes what the system does. The mystery schools describe this in the language of initiation. The awareness of the practitioner determines what reality reveals. The physicists describe it in the language of measurement. The vocabulary is different. The phenomenon is identical. In 1944, Max Planck, the founder of quantum mechanics, delivered a lecture in Florence titled Das Wesen der Materie, the essence of matter. After a lifetime of studying the most fundamental building blocks of reality, he said this: "All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter, the founder of quantum physics, using the word matrix, describing consciousness as the origin of all matter, not as a spiritual opinion, as the conclusion of a career spent inside the data. Did Planck study the Upanishads? No record of it. Did he consult the Hermetic texts? He was a physicist working in Berlin and Göttingen, not a student of esotericism. Did the Egyptian mystery school teachings reach his desk? There is no evidence they did. He arrived at his conclusion through experimental physics, through decades of studying how matter behaves at the quantum level. And what the data told him was the same thing the Vedic seers described 3,000 years earlier. Consciousness is not a byproduct of matter. Matter is a byproduct of consciousness. 2 methods, 1 conclusion. The convergence is not metaphorical. It is structural. The typical response from skeptics is that Planck was speaking philosophically, not scientifically, that he was an old man musing about the meaning of life, not reporting findings. That response does not hold under examination. Planck explicitly stated he was speaking as a physicist. He said, "As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as the result of my research about the atoms this much. There is no matter as such." He was not speculating. He was reporting what a career of empirical research forced him to conclude, and he is far from alone in that conclusion. John Archibald Wheeler, Princeton University, 1989. 3 words that quietly rewrote the foundation of physics, it from bit. Every physical quantity, every it, derives its ultimate significance from information, from bits. Binary yes-no answers. Wheeler wrote, "Every item of the physical world has at bottom an immaterial source and explanation, that all things physical are information theoretic in origin, and this is a participatory universe. The physical world is not made of matter, it is made of information, and information requires a system to process it. The universe, in Wheeler's formulation, is not a machine that runs independently. It is a participatory process that includes the observer as a structural component." The holographic principle, developed by Gerard 't Hooft in 1993 and expanded by Leonard Susskind in 1995, is not a metaphor. It is a mathematical framework within theoretical physics, and it states something that sounds like it was taken directly from a mystery school initiation. The information required to describe a 3-dimensional volume of space can be completely encoded on its 2-dimensional boundary. The depth you perceive, the 3-dimensional space between you and the walls of the room you're in right now, may be a projection from a lower dimensional surface, not metaphorically, mathematically. The equations work. The physics is self-consistent. And what Plato described in his allegory of the cave, prisoners watching shadows projected onto a flat surface, mistaking the projections for reality, is a description of the holographic principle articulated 2,400 years before the mathematics existed to formalize it. Something in you has felt this for longer than you can explain. Not as a theory you encountered in a book, as a direct sense, quiet, persistent, impossible to argue away, that the world you see is not the complete picture. That behind the appearances, behind the textures and surfaces and apparent solidity, something deeper is generating what shows up on the surface of experience. That sense is not paranoia. It is not detachment from reality. According to every tradition we have examined tonight, and every physicist whose work we have cited, that sense is accurate perception. You are recognizing the construct from inside the construct. And the traditions gave it a name, the physicists gave it equations, and your own awareness gave it a feeling. All three are pointing at the same structure. Atoms, the building blocks that compose every physical object you have ever touched, are 99.99999% empty space. The nucleus, which carries nearly all the mass, occupies roughly 1/1,000,000th of the atom's total volume. The rest is probability cloud, electrons existing not as solid particles orbiting a center, but as mathematical likelihoods of being detected in certain regions. Solid matter is not solid. The sensation of solidity when you press your hand against a table is electromagnetic repulsion between the electron clouds of your hand and the electron clouds of the table. Nothing is physically contacting anything. The hardness you feel is force, not contact. Patterns of energy organized by invisible fields. The physical world, examined closely enough, is made of almost nothing, arranged by something that has no physical form. What did the Buddhist teaching of Sunyata describe 2,500 years before the electron microscope confirmed it? That all things are empty of inherent substance. That no phenomenon possesses independent, stand-alone reality. That everything you encounter, from the densest stone to the most solid wall to the body you carry, is a configuration of conditions, a web of relationships with no independent core. Remove the conditions, change the relationships, and the thing you called solid reveals that it had no independent existence to fall back on. A teaching formulated through meditation and the sustained, direct observation of experience itself. Confirmed by particle accelerators and quantum field theory using instruments the ancient practitioners never imagined. Written in a language that predates modern science by 2.5 millennia. Confirmed in a language of mathematics and experimental data. The vocabulary is completely different. The finding is identical. The standard objection is that ancient Buddhists did not know about atoms. Correct? They did not need to. They observed the identical principle at the scale of direct human experience, that no object, no sensation, no thought, no person, no moment carries inherent, self-sustaining substance. Everything is conditional. Everything is relational. Everything is dependent on something else for its existence. Modern physics found the same truth at the subatomic level using billion-dollar particle accelerators and centuries of accumulated mathematical theory. The Buddhist practitioner found it sitting in a cave in northern India with nothing but sustained, disciplined attention directed at the nature of experience itself. The scale of observation is vastly different. The conclusion they reached is not. In 1967, Konrad Zuse, the engineer who built the first programmable computer, proposed something that sounded radical at the time and sounds prophetic now. He suggested that the universe itself might be a computation. Not like a computation, a computation. Running on what he described as a cellular automaton, a grid of simple units following deterministic rules that, through repetition and interaction, generate the complexity we call physical reality. 2 decades later, physicist Edward Fredkin expanded this into what he called digital philosophy. Information is more fundamental than matter and energy. Time and space are discrete, not continuous. The universe is a finite-state digital machine. 2 minds, a computer pioneer and a theoretical physicist, independently arrived at what the Pythagoreans formalized in the 6th century BCE. Reality runs on code. Code, information, consciousness, mathematics, vibration. Every system that has ever seriously examined the nature of reality, ancient or modern, Eastern or Western, spiritual or scientific, has arrived at the same cluster of words. Not one of them concludes with matter, not one of them concludes with substance, not one of them concludes with solid. They all arrive at the same place. And the fact that they arrive there independently, through meditation and through mathematics, through initiation and through experimentation, through silence and through particle accelerators, is the convergence that should stop every person who encounters it in place. Because independent convergence in any field of inquiry is the strongest form of evidence that exists. The simulation debate is resolved. Not because someone proved we live in a computer simulation, because the question was always wrong. Are we in a simulation presupposes that somewhere outside the simulation there exists a base reality made of actual substance, real matter, real solidity, real independence. Every source examined tonight says the same thing about that presupposition. There is no base layer made of substance. Not according to Hindu philosophy, not according to Buddhist analysis, not according to Egyptian theology, not according to Pythagorean mathematics, not according to Hermetic teaching, not according to quantum mechanics, not according to the holographic principle, not according to digital physics. Substance is the illusion. Information, consciousness, mathematics and pattern, those are what remain when you strip the illusion away. Something in you has always suspected this, not because someone told you, because you noticed. The moments when reality felt thin, when the patterns were too precise to be random, when the timing was too exact to be accident, when something shifted in your circumstances, in direct response to something that shifted in your awareness. Those moments are not anomalies in a material universe. They are the normal behavior of an informational one. In a universe made of matter, your consciousness is a side effect. In a universe made of information, your consciousness is the operating system. And everything you have ever experienced that felt like more than coincidence was the system responding to a change in the operator. Imagine a character inside a video game becoming aware that the world it inhabits is generated, not aware of the specific hardware running the program that is unknowable from inside, but aware that the environment is rule-based, responsive to input, and structured by code. That awareness alone changes everything, not because the game stops running, because the character begins interacting with the system differently, reading patterns instead of reacting to surfaces, understanding mechanics instead of being pushed around by them, using the rules instead of being used by them. Every mystery school that ever existed was designed to produce exactly this shift, from unconscious participant to conscious operator. That is the practical meaning of every text and every experiment we have covered tonight. The Hermetic principle of mentalism, the first and foundational law, is not a philosophical curiosity stored in old books. It is an operational instruction. If the universe is mental, if consciousness is the medium from which physical configurations emerge, then the quality of your consciousness is not a side effect of your circumstances. It is the generative mechanism producing your circumstances. The same way the quality of code determines the output of a program. The same way the clarity of a signal determines the quality of a transmission. The same way the state of a dreamer shapes the content of the dream. This is not a metaphor. It is the convergent conclusion of independent traditions and independent physics, arriving at the same structural description of how reality operates. How do you change the input? Every tradition we have examined answers this question, and the answers converge to a remarkable degree. The Egyptian practitioners at Memphis taught that thought and speech are the instruments of creation, that what is held in the heart and expressed through the tongue is the mechanism by which reality is generated at the individual level. The Hermetic tradition taught that sustained, directed mental concentration is the means by which the practitioner participates in reality's construction. The Buddhist tradition taught that seeing through the emptiness of current configurations allows the practitioner to release attachment to them and permit new ones. The Pythagoreans taught that understanding the mathematical structure gives operational access to the system. 4 traditions, 1 instruction. The quality and precision of awareness determines what reality generates. The mainstream version of this teaching, the version that circulates in self-help culture, is think positive and good things happen. That is a cartoon drawn from the edge of an operational principle. The mystery schools did not teach positive thinking. They taught precision of consciousness. The difference between the two is the difference between wishing for rain and understanding atmospheric science well enough to predict exactly when and where precipitation will occur. One is hope. The other is knowledge. And in a universe whose substrate is mental, knowledge is not merely informative, it is operational. Knowing how the system works is the prerequisite for working the system. And every tradition we have examined guarded that knowledge behind years of preparation, not out of elitism, but because imprecise knowledge applied to a mental universe produces imprecise results. Precision. Not volume, not intensity, not emotional force. Precision. The signal you maintain in consciousness, its clarity, its specificity, its stability over time, determines how effectively it interfaces with the informational substrate from which physical configurations emerge. A blurry signal produces ambiguous results. A scattered signal produces scattered outcomes. A precise, sustained, clearly defined signal produces corresponding results with the fidelity of a well-written program executing its code. Every tradition says this in its own vocabulary. The Pythagoreans said it through mathematical exactness. The Egyptian initiates said it through ritual precision. The Buddhists said it through meditative focus. The physicists say it through the rigor of measurement. Different words, same operating principle. Precision of input determines precision of output. Your consciousness right now, in this moment, is holding a pattern, not one you selected 5 minutes ago, one that has been forming across years, decades of repeated thought, repeated emotional response, repeated internal narrative running beneath the surface of daily activity. That pattern is the signal you are continuously broadcasting into a system that is fundamentally informational and responsive. And the system, being informational, is responding to your signal with perfect fidelity, not rewarding you, not punishing you, reflecting you, with the same precision that a mirror reflects whatever stands before it. If you hold a new pattern with sufficient clarity and sufficient duration, the reflection changes, not because you asked it to, because the system has no mechanism for doing anything other than reflecting what it receives. The practitioners who completed their initiation in the mystery schools, at Memphis, at Eleusis, in the Pythagorean inner circle, did not emerge with supernatural abilities. They emerged with a fundamentally different relationship to reality. What changed was not their capacity to manipulate the physical world through force or will. What changed was their understanding that the physical world is generated by consciousness, and that understanding gave them operational access to a mechanism that uninitiated people experience passively. They did not escape the construct. They learned how it works. And learning how it works is the only form of power that a mental universe recognizes. Wheeler's It from Bit contains a practical instruction embedded inside a physics paper. If reality is information, if every physical quantity derives its existence from bits of information, then the practitioner's task is to become literate in the informational language from which reality is generated. The mystery schools called this literacy initiation. The Hermetic tradition called it understanding the principles. Modern physics calls it reading the data. The vocabulary shifts with the century and the culture. The skill being described does not change. Learn to read the code. Learn to write in the code. Learn to recognize that the code is not outside you. It is the medium of your own awareness, and becoming fluent in it is what every tradition means when it uses the word awakening. 5 convergence points. 5 places where independent ancient traditions and independent modern physics produce conclusions that are not merely similar but structurally identical. First, reality is fundamentally mental or informational, not material. Planck, Wheeler, the Upanishads, the Hermetic tradition, the Memphite theology all say this explicitly. Second, observation, the engagement of consciousness with a system, participates in determining what that system becomes. The double-slit experiment, the Buddhist teaching on dependent origination, and every mystery school initiation all describe this. Third, the underlying structure of reality is mathematical, geometric, and code-like. Pythagoras, digital physics, sacred geometry across every ancient tradition. Fourth, what appears solid is emptiness organized by vibration and force. Atomic physics, Buddhist sunyata, hermetic vibration. Fifth, there are levels of reality beyond the visible, and accessing them requires a transformation of consciousness. String theory's extra dimensions, the Hindu lokas, the hermetic planes of being, the layered initiation structure of every mystery school. What do you do with 5 independent convergence points? You stop debating whether the conclusion they share is true. 5 independent confirmations from traditions that never communicated with each other exceeds any reasonable threshold of coincidence. You stop consuming the evidence and start applying it. If reality is mental, your mental state is not a commentary on life. It is the code generating life. If observation shapes outcome, your attention is not passive consumption. It is active creation. If the structure is mathematical, precision matters infinitely more than enthusiasm. If solidity is illusion, attachment to current configurations is attachment to a temporary arrangement. If there are levels beyond the visible, expanding your awareness is not a luxury. It is the most practical thing you can do. Every tradition that accessed this knowledge required preparation. The Egyptian initiates spent years in training before the central revelation was shared. The Pythagorean students observed years of silence before the deeper mathematics was revealed. The candidates at Eleusis fasted, purified, and walked in procession for days before the final night of the mysteries. Modern physics students spend years studying mathematics before quantum mechanics becomes intelligible. The knowledge itself is not complex. The readiness of consciousness to hold it, to receive it without distorting it, to integrate it without reducing it to a comfortable abstraction, that is what requires time. And that preparation is not separate from the knowledge. It is part of it. Where are you in that preparation? Not as a judgment, as a location. You are receiving this at a specific point in a process that has been unfolding in your awareness longer than you may realize. The fact that you reached this moment in this content, that the information is landing as recognition rather than novelty, that you are hearing confirmation of something you already sensed rather than encountering it for the first time, places you at a specific position in the sequence. And the next step in that sequence is not more information. It is practice, application, the shift from understanding the construct to operating within it with the precision that every tradition we have examined tonight describes as the mark of the initiated. The idea that you need more information before you can act is itself part of the construct's design. The informational system, if we are using that language, is structured to keep you consuming data without applying it, watching another video, reading another article, accumulating another concept without ever testing it against the surface of lived experience. Every tradition we have covered tonight says the same thing about this pattern: understanding without application produces nothing. The mystery schools did not graduate theorists. They graduated practitioners, people who had integrated the knowledge into their daily operating system, not merely stored it in their intellectual memory. The gap between knowing and doing is the only gap the construct actually enforces, and closing it is the initiation. 5,000 years. One convergent conclusion. The construct is mental, the observer is creative, the code is mathematical, substance is empty, and the levels of reality go deeper than what your senses report. Every tradition we have examined tonight, Vedic, Buddhist, Egyptian, Pythagorean, Hermetic, agrees on all 5 points. Every laboratory that has investigated the fundamental nature of matter, from Planck's radiation experiments to the double-slit apparatus to the equations of the holographic principle, confirms them. The simulation debate was never really about whether the conclusion is true. 5 independent traditions and 2 centuries of physics leave very little room for doubt. The debate was about whether the people encountering the conclusion are ready to act on it. And that is a question only you can answer. Every physicist cited tonight, Planck, Wheeler, Susskind, Heisenberg, 't Hooft, arrived at their conclusions through data. None of them intended to validate ancient mysticism. None of them set out to prove that consciousness is fundamental. The data forced them there. Planck spent his entire career studying matter and concluded, there is no matter as such. Wheeler spent his career studying physics and concluded, reality is information, not substance. Heisenberg spent his career studying measurement and concluded, the act of observing determines what is observed. They did not choose these conclusions. The experimental evidence chose the conclusions for them, and the conclusions match, point for point, what ancient seers recorded thousands of years earlier using no equipment at all. You arrived here through different evidence, not laboratory instruments, lived experience. The sense, persistent, quiet, impossible to dismiss permanently, that something about this world does not fully add up. The moments when reality responded to an internal shift in ways the material model has no mechanism to explain, the timing that was too precise, the synchronicity that kept appearing, the pattern that repeated until you finally noticed it. Those moments are your data set, and your data matches theirs. The physicist's data says consciousness is structural. Your data says the same thing. The only difference is the instrument of measurement, and the ancient traditions would argue that your instrument is the more fundamental one. Somewhere tonight, a physics student is reading Wheeler's 1989 paper for the first time and recognizing the same structure you are recognizing right now. Somewhere, a practitioner is sitting in meditation and encountering the emptiness that the Buddhist tradition has been pointing toward for 25 centuries. Somewhere, someone is having the experience the Eleusinian initiates had, the direct, unmediated encounter with a layer of reality that the ordinary senses cannot access. The paths look different. The recognition at the end of each path is the same, and you are on one of those paths at this moment. Whether you entered through physics, through spirituality, through intuition, or through a piece of content that appeared on your screen at this exact point in your life. The ancient texts, the mystery schools, and quantum physics agree on one thing above all others. The role of the observer is not passive. You are not a spectator in a universe that operates independently of your awareness. You are a participant in a reality that is generated in part by the quality and direction of your consciousness. That is not a comforting spiritual platitude. It is the convergent conclusion of every serious investigation into the nature of reality ever conducted, across every century, every continent, and every method of inquiry that human beings have devised. The only question that remains is not whether this is true, it is what you do with the fact that it is. The end of the simulation debate looks like this. The question, are we in a simulation, stops being a debate and starts being an operating manual. You stop asking whether reality is constructed and start learning how the construction works. You stop consuming evidence and start applying the conclusion the evidence points to. The mystery schools did not debate the nature of reality. They practiced inside it. The physicists did not speculate about consciousness. They measured its effects. And you, at this point in this content, at this point in your process, are standing at the same threshold every initiate and every pioneer has stood at, the moment when knowing something becomes doing something about it. The construct will keep running, whether you engage with it consciously or not. The patterns will keep generating, the reflection will keep reflecting, the code will keep executing its instructions with or without your awareness of how it works. The only variable that shifts is whether you participate in the process with the precision the Pythagoreans practiced, the sustained awareness the Buddhists cultivated over lifetimes, the mental clarity the Hermetic tradition formalized into 7 operational principles, the ritual focus the Egyptian initiates mastered through years of preparation, or whether you let the default patterns continue running your experience without any conscious intervention from you. Both options are available right now. Both produce outcomes. Both are consequences of a mental universe operating exactly the way every source we have examined tonight says it operates. 5,000 years of independent investigation, one convergent conclusion. The debate is not over because someone won the argument. The debate is over because the evidence, from every direction, from every century, from every method of inquiry that human beings have devised, points to the same place. And the place it points to is not a theory about reality. It is a description of reality that becomes operational, that starts producing measurable changes in your experience. The moment you stop treating it as information to be stored and start treating it as instruction to be followed. The traditions were clear about this distinction. The physicists, through their own methods, confirmed it. The only remaining step is yours. You found this tonight. Whatever path brought you here, algorithm, recommendation, search, or what the traditions would call synchronicity, the fact that this specific convergence of information reached your awareness at this specific point in your process is itself a data point. In a universe made of information, the information that reaches you is not random, it is responsive. The 5 traditions agree on this too. The teaching finds the student when the student is ready for the teaching. What you do with it now is the only open variable, and the construct, being mental, being informational, being responsive, is registering what you decide. If you stayed until the end, write in the comments, "I see the code. I have placed another lesson on your screen right now. Your next step on this path." Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.